Now it's about to start recording. Yes, now it's recording. Good. So today we will discuss ethnic terrorism, ethnic conflict, civil war, and next week will be our last class day. Next week we will discuss ethnic incorporation models, the ways the states treat their ethnic minorities. That will be the topic for the next week. But for today, we will stick to our original topic of ethnic violence. And we will start it from last week's discussion, because last week we discussed ethnic mobilization in peaceful terms. And if you remember, we said that ethnic mobilization had some definitive criteria. For one thing, it has an adjective of ethnic. So it must be done for ethnic goals. There must be some ethnic motivation behind that. And also there is the main term of mobilization, which means that doing something in terms of mobility, in terms of moving, behaving, doing something with a political motivation collectively. So this was the definition of mobilization. So when we merge the two, it means that you must have a political aspiration, some political goals for your ethnic community, for a given ethnic group, and a number of people should get together and they should do something about it in the political landscape. And we said the most known example of political mobilization, whether ethnic or non-ethnic, is voting in the elections. But that's not all. You can sign petitions, you can join demonstrations and protest activities. These are all different peaceful ethnic mobilizations. We also made a distinction between different peaceful mobilizations, and we said that some of them, like voting, are conventional. They are formal channels of mobilization. They are legal, they are conventional, they are formal. Some others might be legal or illegal, but they are peaceful. But no matter what, they are unconventional or informal. So you see, let's say, social movements, organizing demonstrations, organizing protest activities. And after a while, the social movements can become more institutionalized. They can even transform into political parties. But social movements, by definition, are loose. They are, by definition, not very tight and not everlasting. They are formed for a given activity and they disperse. If they don't disperse, if they survive after the particular, let's say, demonstration activity, then they turn out to be formal organizations, and sometimes in the form of political parties. And in the online world nowadays, we can also discuss whether online demonstrations, online mobilizations count for political mobilization or not. Let's say starting a campaign on change.org, does it count? Is it a social movement? Is it a political mobilization? Is it an act of political mobilization? Nowadays, we tend to accept such online activities as political mobilization. Because at the end of the day, people got together, maybe not in the physical space, but in the virtual space, and they gather around a common cause and they do something about it. So that counts. But so far, so good. So far, all these acts of mobilization are peaceful, whether they are conventional or not. And by conventional, what I mean is going through the established channels of mobilization. By unconventional, what I mean is going around those established formal organizations. So, this is pretty much what we discussed last week. And this week, we will talk about another unconventional act of mobilization, but this time not only unconventional, but also violent mobilization. So when you look at mobilization incidents, there are two important parts of any given mobilization. One is the goal of the mobilization, the purpose. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to, protest the rise in the prices? Is that the common cause? Or are they trying to save the planet? Maybe protesting against the air pollution, against environmental degradation. Is that the cause? Or maybe they want to march to the power. Maybe they want to become the leading political force in the country, but they don't do it just with voting, but they also start to some sort of revolution. So that revolution might aim to create a Marxist state. That revolution might aim to create an Islamist state, no matter what they frame it with. But all mobilizations have goals, and those goals mostly are clearly stated in a way that the participants and the people who receive the call to participate have a sense of the goal. They know that I'm joining this activity, this mobilization, in order to create this political impact. So that's the goal part. In terms of goals, and in the scope of our class, we can distinguish two types of goals. One is the ethnic goal, the other ones are the non-ethnic goals. And what we care for this class is the ethnic goal. We will not specify, we will not focus on non-ethnic goals. Non-ethnic goals might be, as I just said, demonstrations against price raises, economic policies, demonstrations against, some political corruption incident, demonstrations in order to, make or create a more Islamist, a more Marxist, a more liberal country, no matter what. These are non-ethnic goals. Now, let's get back to the ethnic goals. With ethnic goals, what we mean is the mobilization tries to achieve a better condition for the ethnic group. It tries to, work for the sake of the ethnic group. Maybe they will hurt the ethnic group. Maybe they will not provide any help, but that is the stated goal by the organizers. That's the framing of the incident. And what those ethnic goals might be. What can you do to change the political atmosphere in favor of your ethnic group? Any ideas, guys? Here I want to hear from you. You can just jump in.
Hocam, can you hear me?
I can, Ali Osman, yes.
So, for example, they can change the institutional framework. Like, if there is a one ethnic group who dominates the institution of the political and economic sphere, they can try to implement or change the, for example, the language preferences in the institutions or the economic distribution of the wealth in the country to improve their ethnic status in the country.
So very good. And as you see, we said ethnic and non-ethnic, but that ethnic goal might be political, it might be economic, it might be cultural, or it might be a mixture of them. So let's say Ali Osman talked about economic conditions of the group and also political conditions and cultural in terms of language. You can take all of them and you can see them all in a single mobilization. But sometimes mobilizations stress one dimension of this. So political, economic, and cultural. Let's start with the cultural, ethnocultural goals. So ethnic groups, as you remember from our earlier discussions, are distinguishable from the rest, from the other ethnic groups, by some cultural boundary makers, some cultural markers, let's call them, which might be the language. Sometimes religion might play a role. Sometimes the way people appear, let's say dress, and the way they dress up. Sometimes, I don't know, even ethnic cuisine might be a marker for your ethnic group. But most commonly around the world, we see language functioning as the ethnic marker. And those ethnic groups, we call them ethno-linguist groups, not ethno-religious. There are such type of groups too, but if the ethnic group is distinguished by the language, we call them ethno-linguist groups. So such ethnic groups might demand more rights for their language. Let's say in Turkey, think about that. In Turkey, the greatest ethnic group, other than the majority Turks, the greatest ethnic group is the Kurds. And Kurds are an ethno-linguist group. Because what distinguishes Turks and Kurds is the language. There is a Kurdish language, which is very different from the Turkish language. The Turkish language is a branch of Ural-Altay language family, but Kurdish is a part of the Indo-European language family. So Kurdish is closer to Arabic, English, Farsi in terms of the syntax, in terms of structure of the grammar. Turkish is closer with Japanese, Finnish, Hungarian, or Korean, such languages. These are two broad families. And also vocabulary is different. Not just the syntax, not just the structure, but also vocabulary is different. So, an ethnic organization in Turkey, a Kurdish ethnic organization in Turkey might have some ethnocultural, in this case, ethno-linguist goals. They might demand greater access to Kurdish language education. Or they might demand Kurdish to become an official language. So they might demand Turkey to be a bilingual country, not just Turkish, but Kurdish. And what it means to have an official language. If Kurdish becomes official language in Turkey, you might write it in the constitution, because in the constitution it says Turkish is the official language. In the new case, you can say Turkish and Kurdish. Or maybe they don't demand that. Maybe they don't care what rights in the constitution. They might demand a Kurdish education in public schools. And there is such a demand in certain circles. Let's say ethnic party, HDP, they demand that Kurdish must be the primary language of education in places where Kurds are intensely live, where Kurds are, in the population dominant group. They demand that in such places, Kurdish must be the primary language of education. So students should take all classes in Kurdish. So this is an ethno-cultural demand. Or sometimes the ethno-cultural demand might be even more minimalist, very, very minimalist. I don't know, think about 20 years ago in Turkey. So actually, let's go back a little bit further. Before Özal years, there was no way to listen to Kurdish songs. They were banned. If the police figures out that you are listening to a Kurdish song, you have a cassette or a plaque, a recorder, let's say, then you would probably go to prison for that. And in those times, if people demonstrate for freedom for Kurdish music, that will be another ethno-cultural goal, ethno-cultural demand. So these are the language dimension of the culture dimension of the ethnic goals. So language is under the culture and culture is under the other ethnic goals. We said there are three goals: cultural, political, and economic. And under culture, we gave the example of language. But sometimes it might be about faith, because sometimes religion becomes the marker of ethnicity. There is a certain group of people living in India, predominantly in India. We call them the Sikh people. Their center is the province of Punjab in India, and they have certain visible markers, because their faith requires them, for men of this faith, they have to leave short beard. They have, long beard. They need to have long beard. And they also don't cut their hair. So long hair and long beard. But you don't see the hair, because their religion asks them to wear turban. So they have mustache, and then beard, and then long hair, and also they have turban. So that's faith-based marker. And we call Sikh people as not only a different religious community, but also a different ethnic group. They are an ethno-religious group. They also migrated intensely to United Kingdom. And in the UK, they made certain demands. They said that if we go to army, we cannot have war helmet, the military uniforms helmet, but we need to wear our turban. Or certain government jobs require you to have a certain type of dress, uniform. And again, they said that no matter what we do, post officer, military personnel, police officer, we need to wear our turban. So that was an ethnic demand, and also an ethno-cultural demand, but this time not language-based, but religion-based ethno-cultural demand. Because the Sikh people, unlike Muslims or Christians, it's a mono-ethnic religious faith. So you can see different ethnic groups inside Islam or inside Christianity, but Sikh people, it's a narrower faith community, and it's an ethno-religious ethnic community. So these are the cultural goals. So a number of people can mobilize to get more rights for their ethno-religious side or for their ethno-linguistic side. So these are all different cultural groups, cultural goals. The second goal might be economic. So some people can mobilize, and they might demand further economic rights for their ethnic group. Again, it's not economic rights for the working class. It's not economic rights for all citizenry. This is the economic rights, demanding economic rights for a given ethnic group. Otherwise, we wouldn't call this an ethnic demand or an ethnic goal. It would be non-ethnic. If it had cross-cut the ethnic boundaries. Again, let's give an example from Turkey. In the 60s, when we saw the first traces of modern Kurdish mobilization in Turkey, actually it wasn't cultural, it was not political, it was economic. In the 60s, the first wave of ethnic mobilization amongst Turkey's Kurds, the argument was quite Marxist, but framed in an ethnic fashion. The argument was as follows. They said that the real proletariat of Turkey are the Kurds. The southeastern Anatolia is underdeveloped, they have worse living conditions, and the government, all the governments in the Republican era, neglected the Kurds of Turkey. And that was the language. This was how they framed their ethnic goal, so making the economic conditions of Kurds better. This is the second dimension of possible ethnic goals, economic dimension. The third dimension, the third goal, again, an ethnic group, of course not as a group, as a whole, but the people who join to the mobilization from a given ethnic group might demand political rights for a given ethnic group, for their own ethnic group. And there are different degrees of political rights. At the maximum level, they might demand a separate, independent statehood. In other words, they might demand secession or separation. So in Turkey's case, demanding an independent Kurdistan would be the maximum demand in terms of the political dimension. The lowest demand, in other words, the least challenging or the easiest one to satisfy is voting rights. In Turkey, all ethnic groups are granted voting rights from day one up to today. But let's give another example. In the United States, African Americans for a long time did not have the right to vote. And that was, you can call it racial, because race is a different term, but it also functions as ethnic in this case. So, for this particular political right, you can see, let's say, black mobilization in the United States. And in fact, they got this right only in 1964. Up until then, up until 1964, yes, on paper, African Americans had the right to vote, but different states inside the United States, different provinces, I mean, they put certain barriers to prohibit or to hinder black voting. Sometimes they put some tax criteria. In other words, you need to have some certain tax account in order to vote. Sometimes they put certain criteria for, let's say, literacy test. In order to vote, you need to read and write, but that was lower for African Americans compared to the whites. Sometimes they put certain criteria for, let's say, your grandparents must have the right to vote in order for you to vote. And many of the blacks, many of their grandparents, they did not have the right to vote. So a collection of such laws and regulations, they are called Jim Crow laws, they hindered black voting for a long, long time, and I'm talking about 60s. So, and on top of cultural restrictions, on top of economic restrictions, on top of segregation, there were such demands. And with Civil Rights Act and with Voting Rights Act in 63 and 64, finally, a resolution came to life. But at the minimum, an ethnic group, if denied of voting rights, might demand voting rights. then they might demand for liberty to create ethnic political parties. Because in certain countries, it is forbidden to form ethnic parties. In Bulgaria, let's say. In Bulgaria, about 10% of the country's population is Turkish, and the constitution prohibits the creation of Turkish political parties, ethnic political parties. They don't say Turkish in the constitution. They say ethnic, but it means Turkish in the Bulgarian case. Or think about Greece. In Greece, it's a very, very basic restriction. Turks are not called Turks. You cannot call them Turks. You cannot put a sign on your store saying that it's a Turkish store. The word Turkish is forbidden. In Greece, in contemporary Greece, I'm not talking about 50 years ago, 100 years ago. The Turks of Greece are under a very heavy pressure. So different ethnic groups in different countries might have different demands. Might be voting rights, might be, let's say, the liberty to form a political party, ethnic political party. At maximum, we said creating an independent statehood for the ethnic group, and somewhere in between, autonomy, ethnic federalism, in other words. That might be a different goal of ethnic groups or ethnic organizations, because the groups don't have a single homogeneous demand. There are different factions inside each ethnic group. So these are the political demands, political goals for mobilizations. So to sum up, what I said was ethnic mobilizations, ethno-political mobilizations, they can be distinguished by two criteria, by their goals and by their methods, means. We will talk about means in a bit. But for the goals, it might be political goals from voting rights to secession. It might be economic goals, let's say, making the economic conditions better for an ethnic group. And the third dimension of these goals would be cultural. More freedom to teach your language or to practice your religion. And at more maximalist things, official recognition, bilingual statehood, such things. It's all, let's say, scala. It's all, from minimum to the maximum. There are different degrees. So, any questions so far in terms of goals? Oh, guys, I missed your chat line. Let me figure out. Okay, I will read it. Omar is saying that it's visible, hocam. Another example is Sunnis in Iran. I am reading it from Omar's message here. The Sunnis in Iran, they are not allowed to build any single mosque for Sunnis in Tehran. In Egypt, Christians wanted in certain times to be more constitutionally recognized. Actually, Omar, what about the Christians in Egypt, the Qibti population? So you can talk it on the mic. So what demands they have? Let's open this up because Omar is from Egypt, right? So maybe let's get some other live examples. Let's say an ethno-religious group, the Qibti population in Egypt. Omar, is your mic working?
Yes,
Yes, you are right. Omar,
yeah,
yes, we are.
Yeah, for example, in certain times, they wanted in the constitution to be written that Egyptian state is a combination of both Muslim and Christian state, but it was not allowed, and their demands were rejected by all the governments.
Okay, so they want constitutional recognition. And
Yeah.
in the Egypt constitution makes reference to Quran, right?
Yeah.
As a source of, not the, but as a source of law.
Yeah.
So if I got it right, then the Qibti, the Christian Egyptians, They want recognition in the constitution. And do you think that they are an ethnic group? Are they framed as an ethnic group in Egypt?
No, I think we have no this ethnic dimensions. We have no ethnic divisions in Egypt because our political nature doesn't allow any ethnic groups to be separated or to be organized in and to have any territorial concentration. So they are not allowed to be mobilized enough.
I see. So thank you, Omar. And you see, guys, so from the state side, it's not an ethnic group. They are not recognized. But in the literature, the Qibti population of Egypt, they are taught to be an ethnic group. So there are different perspectives on the same given group. Same thing goes with Turks of Greece. So for Greece, there are no Turks in Greece. But in the literature and in real at the same time, we know that there are Turks living in Greece. But Greece calls them Muslims or Muslim Greeks, not Turks. So there are different policies, different regulations for different ethnic groups all around the world. Good example, Omar. Thank you. So these are all different dimensions of ethnic goals, we said. Some of them are minimalist, some of them are maximalist. So how much they demand, it depends in different countries, in different ethnic groups. The second dimension is the method of mobilization. And by method, let's make it simple. Do they use violent methods or peaceful methods? That's the differentiation. It doesn't matter what you demand. You might demand, I don't know, to save the planet, or I don't know, to save an animal species in danger. If you are using violence, regardless of your goals, you are a violent organization or a violent act of mobilization. So in terms of methods, we can distinguish between violent and non-violent mobilizations. And today's topic will be on the violent dimension, because the peaceful dimension, we covered it last week. There are different forms of violence, though. Some of them are political, some of them are not political. Some of them are ethnic, some of them are non-ethnic. But what is violence? You know, I have an obsession to define terms. I guess you noticed this in our method class. So when you speak about something, you need to know the meaning of each term. By violence, what we mean is the intentional damage caused upon others. It must be damage. It must be intentional, not accidental. It must be intentional, and it must hurt, or at least it aims to hurt others. You can talk about psychological violence, but mostly we mean physical violence. So to intentionally impose physical harm upon others, that's violence. So certain mobilizations use violence in order to achieve their goals. We said that there are different kinds of violence. We will not cover all of them. Let's say domestic violence, a husband beating his wife. That's not mobilization for one thing, because for political mobilization we need political goals and we need a group of people. And in this case, there is just one husband, one wife. It's not collective action in that sense. And also it's not political. So it's beyond our scope. Or traffic accident. It hurts, but it's not intentional. It's not collective. It's not political. So we will exclude it as well. Or mafia violence, the mob violence. They come, they ask money from you. If they don't pay, they hurt you. Maybe they kill you. This is what mafia does. But again, It might be collective. The mafia, it includes a group of people. It is intentional for sure, but it's not political. We will exclude mafia violence, such criminal acts as well. It will be political violence. It will be collective. A group of people will impose this harm. It will have a political agenda, but it will be an ethnic political agenda. Let's say Marxist groups might form organizations to achieve their goals with violent means, like the Cuban Revolution. Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, they fought against the Batista regime, they formed guerrilla army, and they won the war. And in that war, they killed many people. It was violent, it was political, but it was not ethnic. It was a different ideology, not ethnic nationalism, but Marxism. Or think about Al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization, attacked the Twin Towers in the US, and they attacked certain spots in Turkey as well. They had political agenda. They were collectively mobilizing, not just one crazy person, but a group of people. But again, they were not ethnic. A different ideology, a radical form of Islamism. So for an ethnic violent mobilization, like all ethnic mobilizations, it must be collective, it must be mobilization, doing something, not just thinking, not just feeling, but doing something. It must have political agenda. And if it is a violent mobilization, it must use violent means, violent methods, regardless of the cultural, political, or economic demands. This is what we focus on. And quite confusingly, when we call organizations radical, we don't have clarity. Sometimes people call organizations radical because of their goals. If they want to make, regime change, some radical change, then such organizations are called radical, based on their goals. Let's say separatist organizations, or regime change, revolution. But even if they are not doing anything, just by goals, sometimes they are called radical. But sometimes they are called radical based on the means. They are called radical if they use violent means. So there is such a confusion in the literature. But be aware of that distinction. So means and goals, they are two different realms, and they don't need to go hand in hand. You might have very radical goals, secession, or a full-scale regime change, but you might use peaceful channels. Or you might have very moderate demands, but you might use radical means, violent means. So the two don't need to go hand in hand. So in one dimension, you might be more radical. In the other one, you might be more moderate. So any questions so far? In terms of ethnic goals, we mentioned about ethnocultural, ethno-economic, and ethno-political goals. But in terms of mobilization methods, not goals, mobilization methods, we mentioned about violent and non-violent methods. Is that clear so far? Any questions, any confusion so far? Or you might bring in some new examples. Okay, Omar. Okay, Omar, I got your question. So some say that there must be damage towards civilians to be recognized as a terrorist or violent organization. That's a good example, Omar. And actually, I think it's time to increase the pace a little bit. And now let's talk about different forms of violent mobilizations. Because you hear many things, right? Guerrilla armies, insurgencies, terrorist groups, freedom fighters, liberation armies. There are all these different names given for different violent organizations. You also hear things like riot, rebel, revolution, war. We should distinguish between them too. So you need to pick your words wisely and carefully. We have different names for them because they are different. First, let's start with the distinction between riot, rebellion, revolution, and war. These are 4 types of violent mobilization. They are not traffic accidents. They are political mobilizations. So riot occurs against some policy, might be against economic discrimination, against political discrimination, but the riots are not centralized. So there is no central authority in riots. Maybe because of, let me write them here. I'm writing. So riots, rebellions, revolutions, and wars. We will distinguish these terms. So in riots, what we mean is the mob, the people, without any central authority, without any hierarchy, they just flood into the streets. It occurs spontaneously. Things, just get together, certain factors, and in a certain time, it just, becomes uncontrollable. It just unleashes. So these are riots. They're violent. People burn the stores. They burn the cars parked in the street. Some people attack the government buildings. But there is no central decision-making mechanism there. There is no planning. It's spontaneous. It's like the mob violence. They have some resentments. They want to make political change, but they did not plan it. That's riot. And of course, since they don't have such a clear hierarchy of command chain, they fail. They hurt around, but then they disappear. Rebellions are more centralized. They are more planned. They are less spontaneous. And usually there are some actors behind rebellions, some leaders. They get together, they outline a plan of action, and they push the button. This is how rebellion occurs. But of course, in real world, things are more fuzzy. Sometimes it starts as a form of riot, and in the middle of the riot, some people come forward, they become leaders, and the riot transforms into a rebellion. Such things might happen too. But the moment there are certain leaders, certain planners, then we no longer call it riot. We start to call it rebellion. That's the difference. Revolutions. Revolutions are like rebellions. Their difference is, foremost, they differ in terms of their outcomes. In other words, if a rebellion becomes successful, then we call it a revolution. If a rebellion can bring out radical change, it becomes a revolution. You start to kill some people, you start to attack the state, the government, and then you beat the state, you beat the government, you win. Maybe you create a new Marxist state. Maybe you secede from the state. You make any kind of regime change. So they are all radical changes, and successful rebellions with radical changes are called revolutions. That's the difference. But of course, there are groups that are called revolutionary groups. It means that they are ready to use violence and they want to bring some radical change. Might be regime change or territorial change, secession. But if they fail, what happens is not revolution. It becomes rebellion. If revolutionary groups succeed, then it becomes revolution. So in order to call an incident a revolution, we need to see radical change, radical transformation in the outcome. And the fourth type of violent political mobilization is war, which might be between the states, but also between non-state actors. So wars are distinguished from the others not because of their organization. That's the difference of riot, right? Not because of their outcome, that was for revolution, but they are distinguished by the level of their destruction. They are the most destructive form of political violence. Sorry, I will just make my phone quiet. It got a little bit noisy. Okay. If two states or one state and at least one non-state actor, or in a failed state, two non-state actors, if they fight, and if they kill 1,000 people in total, 1,000 people in a calendar year, 1,000 casualties in a calendar year, and if at least 100 people die from each side, let's say one side loses 900 people, other side loses 100 people. If the destruction reaches that level, 1,000 total casualty and minimum 100 casualties from each side, we call it war. Again, it's not about the goals. Is it for regime change? Is it for secession? Is it for oil? Is it for democracy? We don't care. It's not about the goal. It's not about whether they have some planners, some leaders. It's not about that. It's not about the outcome. It's not about who wins it, what changes after the war. It's not about this. It's only about the degree of destruction, measured by the number of people killed in combat. This is the conventional threshold, 1,000 casualties. Some people find it too high, some people find it too low. But conventionally, most of the literature says that's 1,000. There is a dataset called Correlates of War. That dataset defined the threshold as 1,000, and many people follow their lead. Some people disagree, they have different thresholds, but no matter what, it's a matter of threshold. If 900 people dies, that's not a war. If 1,000 people die, that's a war. Might sound, I don't know, silly to you. So it's just one person, 999 and 1,000. If one more people dies, we call it war. Maybe it doesn't make sense if you look at it from here, but still, it's a matter of distraction, the degree of distraction. You need a threshold somewhere. Of course, there are other forms of political violence, like genocide. Yeah, let's define it too. There is also genocide. So in genocides, okay, Omar, I will just get back to your question. Genocide is also a form of political violence, but it is one-sided. And its actor must be the state. As an individual, you cannot commit genocide. The actor of the violence must be state, and the goal of the violence must be to exterminate a certain cultural community, a certain ethnic group. Then we call it genocide. Okay, so these are the differences: riots, rebellions, revolutions, wars, and genocides. Omar is asking, Hocam, what about the war between the state and some internal or ethnic groups? Is it war? Is it civil war? It is civil war, Omar. If the war takes place inside a given country, then that is civil war. It might be between the state and a non-state actor, or it might be between non-state actors. Because in certain parts of the world, there is no more state. They are called failed states. Certain groups of people rule certain segments of the country, and they might start a war between themselves. So civil wars take place inside a given country, Yemen or Syria. But of course, some outside forces might join. In Yemen, in Syria, we also see many international actors taking place. If the war takes place between two countries, we call this interstate war. If the war takes place between many countries in a given region, we call this regional war. If the war takes place between countries from different continents, we call this world war. So it's about the geographical spread of the war. So civil war, in a nutshell, they are the wars which take place in a given country. Okay. So is that clear so far? So the connection between these terms and our class, any of these acts of violence, revolution, rebellion, war, riot, if they have an ethnic goal, we call them acts of ethnic violence. They don't have to be ethnic, but if their agenda is ethnic, they become ethnic mobilization, but with violent means. It's very different, as you can see, from voting for your ethnic party or from joining a demonstration for your ethnic group. These are also ethnic mobilizations, but violent forms. Any questions so far? Any insights? If I proceeded too fast, if certain parts are in dark, let me know, please. Maybe I should check you guys. Are you there? I'm sure Omar is there. Rafi, you're not sleeping, right? Good. Yeah, let's take attendance. Just type yes, please. Just type yes there. That will be our attendance. Good. Everybody's awake, but you are so quiet. I think it's because of Ramadan. Ibrahim, I was hoping to hear from you. You are very quiet today. It's because you are driving? Good. Not to the good. Good job, Ibrahim. I'm happy. Now, we didn't talk about other things, right? We didn't talk about terrorism, insurgency, guerrilla warfare, liberation armies, freedom fighters. There are still a long list of vocabulary to define, to distinguish. Or asymmetric warfare. You also hear this a lot, especially in ethnic conflicts, or ethnic war, or ethnic conflict. So conflict is the general term for all of them. Conflict means that there is more than one party and their ways of communication is violent. Libya, Ibrahim, yeah, let's start with you, Ibrahim. What's happening in Libya? Is it terrorism? Is it genocide? Is it war? What's happening there?
Libya's situation is very, very, very complicated. We've been in a civil war ever since Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011. From 2011 all the way up to 2014, everything was going to plan. People starting to slowly settle. Situation's getting better. And then someone, I don't want to call him general because that would be giving him some respect, but Khalifa Haftar came through and he started this fitna in the country and split the country into two parts. and started a conflict, started a civil war between basically the west and the east of the country. He split the capital and another city, which is Benghazi, after he destroyed it and killed all the commanders over there and the main forces. Slowly, he has assassinated them and then took over the city. After he did that, he brought in mercenaries from Chad, from Emirates, from Egypt, from France, from many alliances that he made alliances and brought them all the way to Libya and started fighting the people. Recently, this war's been going on since 2014, but recently, for the past 2 years, he's been trying to take over the capital, Tripoli. Now, Tripoli is under the GNA government, which is the legitimate government which every single country is recognizes, and is trying to take over the capital. When that happened, Turkey obviously stepped in, and the civil war I don't know, it's so complicated. I actually thought before Corona, World War III was going to start, and World War III was going to start in Libya. I don't know. I told it's so complicated. While I'm saying this, I'm skipping so many main parts and many important factors because it's a big issue.
But in a nutshell, you call it a civil war, right?
It's a civil war that almost escalated to World War III.
Yes. So, thank you, Ibrahim. So, as you said, it's not a riot because it's not a mob, just burning around. It's not a rebellion in the sense that a non-state actor is trying to overthrow the government and make the Marxist state, something like this. It's not a revolution. They are not planning to create a radical change in terms of regime or territories. It's an act of violence taking place between two parties. Each party has multiple partners, by the way, but there are two factions, two coalitions fighting against each other. We call it a war because it's destructive, because a great deal of people are dying in the combat. Nowadays, it's a lower scale. It's good news. It's not like we are losing hundreds of people every day. But if it reaches 1,000 casualties in a calendar year, that's a war. If it falls down, then we will call it conflict, not a war. Because they are all conflicts. If it becomes destructive enough, we call it war. Thank you, Ibrahim. Sometimes we should catch up because I'm also trying to follow Libya. But I would like to hear your insider point of view. Now, let's get back to our other forms of political violence. By the way, the violence taking place in Libya right now, it's not ethnic. In all wars, ethnic cleavages might play a role. But in Libya, the case is not predominantly ethnic, because both sides are trying to claim the entire country, not for the sake of an ethnic group. So it's not ethnic. It's a different thing. It's just a power struggle without an ethnic motivation. Now, what about terrorism, insurgency, guerrilla warfare, liberation armies, freedom fighters? For one thing, analytically speaking, freedom fighters and liberation armies do not exist. They call themselves as such, but they are not political science definitions. They are not political science terms. It's just, a name those organizations give themselves. So there is no freedom fighter, there is no liberation army, analytically speaking. So, let's start with insurgency. Insurgency is the asymmetric warfare. In other words, there is a power asymmetry between two actors. On the one side, you have a state, the strong part. On the other side, you have the weak part. That's the power asymmetry. So insurgency is the resistance of the weaker party against the state by using violent means, violent methods. This is insurgency. So actually all these liberation armies or freedom fighters, in this sense, they are all insurgent organizations. That's the real name, insurgency. Not liberation army, not freedom fighter. The right name is insurgency. And since they are violent, they use two methods: terrorism, guerrilla warfare, or both. This is the way they use violence. So in other words, terrorism and guerrilla warfare are not the names for organizations, they are the tactics used by organizations. Guerrilla warfare means it's also an asymmetric warfare tactic, by the way. The weaker side uses it against the stronger side. Guerrilla warfare is the tactic which relies on small, mobile, and lightly armed groups, militia. This is guerrilla warfare. So small groups, you cannot attack the state with 1,000 people. The state has fighter jets, tanks. They will destroy you. So you need to have smaller groups. You cannot stick to somewhere. You need to be mobile. You need to get around. If you have a given spot, the state will bomb there. So you need to move around. And lightly armed, because you are moving. You are on the move. You cannot, carry heavy weaponry. And they use mostly AK-47s for this reason. It's very light machine gun. This is guerrilla warfare. What they do, it is the mosquitoes, the fly, mosquito. It's mosquito tactic against the elephant. A mosquito cannot win a battle with elephant if they wrestle in an open space. But it is small, it is mobile, and it is lightly armed. It stings, it bites, and runs away. Again, comes back, bites, and runs away. That's the tactic. Hit and run, hit and run. And eventually, the mosquito hopes that the elephant will be disturbed enough and the elephant will move somewhere else. And that space will remain for the mosquito. This is the guerrilla warfare tactic. The second tactic the insurgencies might use is terrorism. Terrorism is, again, the tactic of a non-state actor. Yes, there is state terrorism that some people call, but actually it is state-sponsored terrorism. States can carry out genocide, they can carry out massacres, they can carry out torture, but we don't call it terrorism in the conventional literature. There are other brutal forms of violence. For terrorism, we try to see non-state actors. And also, the target must include civilians. Not exclusively, but it must include civilians as well. So if the terrorist organization, if an organization kills 10 soldiers, 10 police officers, and a couple civilians together, that's terrorism. So this is the definition of terrorism. And insurgent groups, most of the time, use both tactics. Most of the time, they use terrorism and guerrilla warfare, not alone. But sometimes some of them are more principled. Some of them just stick to guerrilla warfare, not using terrorism. Or sometimes they are fighting against an invading army. And their enemy is just the soldiers. That's a Fallujah. Think about that. In Fallujah, there was insurgency, but their targets were mostly, almost exclusively American soldiers. But that's a very slippery side, because even if you start with such a principled distinction, I will not kill civilians. I will just kill soldiers. Soon after, violence corrupts. Soon after, you find yourself killing fellow Iraqi citizens because you claim they were spies or they were helping American soldiers, or I don't know, they were some comprador bourgeoisie that cooperates with the invading force. So it's very difficult, almost impossible, to pursue guerrilla warfare, but not terrorism. Because sooner or later, these organizations started to target civilians. Okay, these are the terms that we need to distinguish. So again, riot, rebellion, revolution, war, genocide. We talked about them. And later in our second group, we talked about insurgency, guerrilla warfare, and terrorism. And they are all asymmetric warfare terms. So, if such acts of political violence, political mobilization, if they have ethnic motivation, we call them ethnic rebellion, ethnic riot, ethnic conflict. Genocides are ethnic by definition, so we don't need to call them ethnic genocide, or ethnic terrorism. That happens too. So, a number of organizations, terrorist organizations, because they use terrorist tactics, so far have used violence. They targeted civilians and others, of course, not exclusively civilians, but they targeted civilians in order to achieve their political goals for the ethnic group which they claim to represent. Again, there are different levels of analysis. Ethnic groups are not like humans. They don't have one central brain and two arms doing something in a coordinated fashion. Ethnic groups are diverse. They have people with different levels of ethnic identification. They include people with different levels of ethnic mobilization. Some people are more active, some people don't do anything for their ethnic group. And even those who are active for their ethnic group, they might have different goals. Some of them might have cultural, some others economic, some others political goals. Even for those who have political agenda, they might also have different political goals. Some of them might ask for independent statehood, secession, but some of them might just ask for voting rights. So there are different factions, naturally, inside each ethnic group. And eventually, from the same ethnic group, you might have people joining the terrorist organization, but you might have other people, other co-ethnics, fighting against that terrorist organization. Think about, again, the Turkey case. In Turkey, the PKK is an ethnic terrorist organization. It's ethnic in terms of its goals, because it is trying to create an independent, united Kurdistan. It's trying to create a statehood for an ethnic group. It claims to represent Kurds. And the people who join the PKK, not exclusively, but almost exclusively, are Kurdish in ethnic origin. So that's an ethnic terrorist organization. But on the other hand, there are about 80,000 village guards in Turkey. 80,000. That's a huge number. Way more crowded than the PKK. The PKK, even if you include the PYD, still doesn't make up to 80,000 armed men and women. So the village guards in Turkey, their number is around 80,000 now. They are armed, but they fight against the PKK. They are also almost exclusively Kurdish. So as you see, for each ethnic group, there might be some political factions, some apolitical factions. Inside the political factions, there might be some violent ones and some peaceful ones. inside the violent parts, you might see factions fighting against each other. So it's all very complicated, very diverse. Actually, when the PKK started first in late 70s, their first targets were not the state, were not the soldiers or police officers. Their first targets were the most similar organizations. Other Marxist but ethnic, violent organizations. The PKK first wiped out its rivals, the most similar ones, like Kava, like Sterkasor. They were very similar, ethnic and also Marxist and violent organizations, and the PKK first wiped them off. So it kind of monopolized that landscape. There are similar organizations around the world. There used to be even more. There used to be an era where we saw ethnic terrorist organizations pretty much everywhere in the world, even in Europe, in Italy, in France, in Spain, in the UK. There used to be ethnic terrorist organizations like the IRA, like ETA, like the Corsican Army, Corsican Liberation Army. The European organizations, one by one, they were wiped off. Some of them failed. They militarily lost. Some of them were replaced by peaceful ethnic organizations, but they did not survive. Yes, there are some organizations that survive on the paper. There is still a new IRA in the UK, but just in paper. They don't mobilize. They cannot carry out any activities. So this is called ethnic terrorism. Any questions so far? Today we went through concepts. We try to kind of map the literature, which concept stands where. We did not talk about the factors that lead to these outcomes. What causes ethnic terrorist organizations to form? What causes some of them to fail, but some of them to succeed? We did not discuss such matters. We just gave some definitions for different concepts, related concepts. But any examples from you guys? Or any questions about real-world examples? I will wait until I get a question or a comment from you guys. I will ask you then. Are there different types of terrorist organizations? We talked about. Okay, I'm repeating the question. There are different types of terrorist organizations. Ethnic terrorism is one type. What other types you can think of? Eda, if your mic is working, let's hear it from you.
So do you hear me?
Yes.
All right. As you know, maybe Germany has a big problem with right-wing terrorism. And as an example, we had this terrorism attack in Hanau a couple weeks and months ago, which was really sad. And there was one guy, like I want to explain the problem which I had with this terrorism attack and how the government was reacting on it. So after he killed the 9 people, like the terrorists, people already knew, okay, this is a right-wing terrorism. So the domestic intelligence service was looking if he's really a right-wing terrorist. So they asked the neighborhood how the relation was with him to the foreign people. And the people said there was a black neighbor and he was always friendly to him, and also he never spoke like with people bad about these people. So they disclaimed him as not being and right-wing terrorism. So in the report of the Domestic Intelligence Service about this terror act, it is written that that this terrorism act wasn't a right-wing terrorism act, and this is a big problem from the government side, and because in the domestic intelligence services it shows that they already have racist structures. So how you can fight against right-wing terrorism when in the own governmental intelligence services have racist structures? So it's always the same. Like, this is my problem with I have a lot of people too. So that's why nobody, no Muslim, no foreign or non-white people feel safe in this country.
Yeah, very, very good example. So, but that's not a fair response from the West on these matters, as Eda just said. So usually there is this rising right-wing terrorism all around the world. In the New Zealand, in Europe, in the Northern America, mostly Muslims are being attacked. In the case of Germany, unfortunately, Turks living in Germany, some of them are citizens, they became the victims of such terrorist attacks. But the standard response from the host states is, that's not an act of terrorism. This is just one mentally confused person carrying out this attack individually. It's starting to change now, but that was the standard way to frame it in the media and in the state responses. But actually, yes, we know that terrorism requires a collective activity. An individual's act does not count. But we also know that those individuals carrying out right-wing terrorist attacks, they were connected. They have these blogs, online forums. They talk. They they radicalize each other. They have even some publications. So it is not just one crazy person, shooting around. They were, in this sense, planned and motivated actions, and not individual actions. They mostly have some network feeding this outcome. That's a good example. Ali Osman gave the example of the Red Brigades in Italy, which was a Marxist terrorist organization. But again, so there's ethnic terrorism, but not all ethnic organizations are terrorist, of course. There is Marxist terrorism, but not all Marxist organizations are terrorist. So they don't represent the ethnic group, or they don't represent the entire ideology in that sense. And Sinan gave the example of Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, ISIS. Again, these were Islamist or radical Islamist, let's call it, organizations. But again, not all Islamist organizations are terrorist. Just because these terrorist organizations, they tend to hijack the ideology. And since peaceful actions, peaceful events don't make up to the headlines, we don't hear about peaceful acts, we just hear about violent acts because we think they are newsworthy. And unfortunately for that reason, the Kurdish question is discussed mostly in relation to the PKK. They hijacked the topic. For Islamism, it has a negative connotation because of such terrorist organizations. They hijack the term. That's another negative side effect. Okay, so Omar says that in one article, it is mentioned that their transnational nature, let's say Kurdish community, and territorial concentration, southeast of Turkey and northern Iraq, and the successful examples like the Kurdish region, the Kurdish quasi-statehood in Iraq, border countries, Iran, Iraq, leaders, international community are factors to keep those ethnic terrorist organizations alive. That's a whole different discussion, Omar. That's important. I'm not sure whether we can get there, but that's a very important question. Why certain terrorist organizations survive over decades, while others, they die quick. While some terrorist organizations are quite successful in their killing capacity, but others, they cannot carry out such destructive acts. What creates that differentiation? We will get there, maybe today, maybe next week, but we will discuss that. Furkan talks about state-sponsored terrorism. We said that terrorism requires non-state actors. Some people disagree, but the conventional wisdom claims this. Yet, all terrorist organizations, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, get help from the states. The PKK. For years, many states supported the PKK, sometimes openly. Let's say Greece, throughout the 90s, Greece sponsored the PKK. There were PKK camps in Greece. They were not infiltrating border from Greece, but they were getting training there. Eventually, we even captured Abdullah Öcalan, the PKK's leader, in Kenya, Nairobi, in the Greek embassy. So Greece was hiding Abdullah Öcalan. After that, in 2000s, Greece stopped helping the PKK. But in the 90s, they were supporting the organization. Syria, Hafez Assad, he was providing shelter. In 1998, he had to deport. He had to not deport, but get rid of Öcalan. He sent him to Russia because Turkey was about to declare war to Syria. And for that reason, Hafez al-Assad had to cut his help for the organization. But, think about the United States. They are providing arms to PYD, Syrian branch of the PKK. For Iran, they are more tricky in this, but at certain times they also provide help. So all terrorist organizations, they get help from states. Otherwise, it's really not easy for non-state actors to fight against states. They need to get money. They need to get intelligence, weapons. It's not easy to access if you don't have some state sponsors. So that's good comment, Furkan. And NSU, Eda mentioned about NSU. We can get back to Eda for that, for the details of NSU. I'm not familiar with the organization.
Shall I
Dissent
talk?
terrorism. Okay, Eda, let's continue with you. Then I will get back to Mohammed. So
Okay, the
very
NSU,
common, right?
a little bit common, but if you want to go more into detail, there is a documentary movie on Netflix about that. But like the NSU is, they had terrorism attacks in Germany. They did it just like with the state community. They get support from the right-wing community, and they secretly they planned everything how to like they had nail bombs and they put it in front of Turkish stores, and the media didn't knew that this is a right-wing terrorism at first. So in also the government, so they thought at first, okay, the Turks are killing each other because of clan stuff, gang stuff, and in the media it was shown like the Döner murderer, and like there you can also see the racism Germany. But yes, at first it wasn't knew that it was the attacks. I think it was more than 11, and yes, and then I'm not 100% sure, but then it was shown that after time the domestic intelligence services was supporting this community with money to get information, but with that money they bought some bomb stuff to build these bombs. So in the end, actually, the domestic intelligence services was creating all this stuff, all this terrorism. But this is something else. I just want to say that this terrorism group was working so good and so structured that even the government didn't knew how they worked, and they was successful. And one of them, it was three people who was planning and put all these bombs in that places. And one of them is still living, and it's Beate Schepke, and she's still in the prison, but she gets, but like the punishment for her is not that high. Like that. Actually, there's more information, but my English is not right now in the right good position to tell that about. But as I mentioned, there is a really nice documentary about it.
By the way, please send the link to me. I will share it with the class. And thanks. I think that was quite a brief summary, a good summary of the events.
Thank you.
And yeah, and some people even connected NSU to the German deep state. Some people even built some connections like that because they looked very professional. It was almost like they were receiving some intelligence. So there are some rumors like that, but we don't know the relation between some people in the state and this organization. It's still not clear. Ayşenur, you said, can I share the meeting records? I do actually. Yeah, thank you, Eda. By the way, guys, the documentary's link just came from Eda now. And Ayşenur, I am sharing the records on YouTube actually. You can find this, you can watch them on YouTube. Maybe I will send you the link for it. And Muhammed, dissent terrorism. What is that, Muhammed? Dissent terrorism?
Hocam, can you hear me?
Yes.
So basically, it's kind of civil disobedience when there are some terrorist groups making like some rebellion against their own government.
Okay, but they are not using violence, right?
No, they are using violence. There are different techniques. One of them is also using violence and strikes, and they also might make some other like propaganda, lobbying, street theater, etc.
Okay, now I get it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If there is no act of violence, we might call it civil disobedience. It won't be counted as terrorism. But if there is act of violence combined with civil disobedience, then that's terrorism. So terrorist organizations don't only carry out terrorist acts. They do many things. They might have publications for propaganda. ISIS, they had newspaper, right? They had this website. They can shoot movies for propaganda. They can even do some good things, helping the poor, saving the planet. But if they are also targeting civilians, that's terrorism. So such organizations, that's why, because of this tactic, are called terrorist organization. But in real life, there is this complexity. Because the organizations transform, they split, they merge, their ideologies change, their methods change. They have different activities, so it really requires expertise in order to understand a single terrorist organization. Okay, Furkan has a question. Furkan, let's hear it from you. I can read it, but let's hear it from you. It will be less boring this way.
Hocam, you hear me?
Yes.
I was going to ask, like at the beginning when we mentioned the right-wing terrorism in Germany against some Muslim minorities or other white minorities in Germany. So I wanted to ask, what do you think about the discrimination and hatred against Syrians in Turkey? Do you think that this violence might escalate in the future, maybe because they would ask for something political, or I don't know, somehow it would escalate this violence and turn into a right-wing terrorism in Turkey? Like also, I think last week it was a hot topic, the police officer shooting a Syrian 19-year-old young person in the So do you think that although this is not an organized violence, but do you think in the future this might turn into a right-wing terrorism in Turkey?
Thank you, Furkan. It's an important question. I think there is the potential. Actually, a while ago, there was this incident. I was really afraid at the day. I will not give the name of the politician, but a politician, he tweeted about an act of crime. And in that tweet, he told a story. A Syrian, I think 2 Syrians, raped a child and killed the child. Was it in Canary? I don't know. Somewhere. I think it was Canary, Istanbul. It was fake, by the way. This place did not happen. This thing did not happen. But the politician, he is a MP in the parliament. This politician tweeted about that. 2 Syrians raping and killing a child. And in Canary, hundreds of Turks just went out to the streets to find the Syrians. That was a horrible escalation. Soon after, very soon, the governor made a statement. He said that no such thing happened. It's a misunderstanding. But that was very close. If we see such, and by the way, it might have been true too. People commit crimes. No ethnic group, no race is free from crimes. Turks sometimes rape people, sometimes Kurds rape, sometimes Syrians rape, sometimes Americans, sometimes Norwegians, all ethnic groups, all races. People from these groups might commit crimes. If it happens, might happen, by the way. If it happens, really, if Syrians somewhere, if they rape and kill a child, I think a very violent reaction might come. An indiscriminate reaction might come. Süleyman just confirmed that it was Canary. I remember about this case in Kayseri a few years ago. A man living alone in an apartment killed 4 children in the Bayram. They knocked the door to get candies. That's a Turkish tradition. He took them in, he raped, and he killed them. The guy was not Syrian. He was a Turkish citizen. But think, if that guy was Syrian, what would happen? And someday that might happen. Someday a Syrian person in Turkey might commit a horrible crime. And the politicians like that guy, okay, it was Ümit Özdağ. We don't need to, it's on Twitter. We don't need to hide the name. That was Ümit Özdağ. If Ümit Özdağ says that you see Syrians are, raping the kids in our streets, you can see a very rapid, very violent reaction, almost indiscriminate reaction. Such things happen. So I think we have that potential. That's quite dangerous. And something opposite might. So there are 4 million Syrians in Turkey. If they face discrimination, indiscriminate violence, they might also form violent organizations. So there is such a potential. I don't think this will happen, but it is possible. So I'm worried, and that's the job for the government to integrate Syrians and also to manage to govern the communication. I think that's a very delicate, very sensitive situation. By the way, Süleyman, I think you heard about that event in Canary. That was a fake news, right? But later on, I believe, if I am not wrong, the governor said that wasn't true. Okay. Yeah, but there were news, right? Yeah, okay. Now we got confirmation. So it did not happen, but Ümit Özdağ tweeted about it. And there was this, I don't know, Twitter is horrible. It just spread very quickly. That's a very sensitive situation. And one day that might happen. Someday, really, a Syrian might rape and kill a child. So this happens. People do that from all races or ethnic groups. If it happens, I can't imagine what might turn out, because people like Ümit Özdağ, will try to escalate the situation. So that will be a huge problem. Okay, thank you, Furkan, for the question. Right now, I don't think we have right-wing groups against Syrians. There is a widespread anti-Syrian sentiment. I see it in my own family. The people in my family, the old guys, they regularly pray, they talk about Islamic Brotherhood, they go to Hajj. But when I talk to these people in my family, not my parents, hopefully, but in my extended family, they keep complaining about Syrians. So there is this anti-Syrian widespread sentiment in Turkey. Yes, I agree, Ali Osman. They became space gods. Sorry. It wasn't space god. What was the real name? Anyway, I forgot. They became günah keçisi. But and Furkan is saying that the main reason of this, I think it's because of a scapegoat. Yes. The main reason of this, I think it's because of political use of Syrians in politics. Yeah, also they became a material, a political capital in that sense. So, there is this anti-Syrian widespread sentiment in Turkey, but I don't think we have right-wing groups yet, like they had in Germany. But that's a potential. That's possible. And unfortunately, some political parties are using this matter in order to gain political support, because there is this widespread sentiment, and if you politicize this sentiment, you will get support. So some political parties use it. It's open for abuse. That's a huge problem. Hopefully we won't get there. Hopefully it won't escalate, but I see the potential. Anyhow, so I think in this final part, I got good contribution from you guys. You gave me good examples from NSU to the Kipti in Egypt, to the Libyan conflict, to the Red Brigades in Italy. So I got good examples from you guys. So I don't want to go through the factors that lead to this outcome. So why certain ethnic groups are less mobile, others are more mobile. While some ethnic groups, they have opposing factions, like there are village guards, but also the PKK, both from inside the Kurdish ethnic group. One is fighting against the PKK, village guards, other is fighting against the Turkish state. But some ethnic groups, they tend to be more monolithic. Some others are way more diverse. So what creates this variation? Maybe next week we can introduce this topic. In a nutshell, there are some demographic explanations about population ratio and population density. There are some geographical explanations about the terrain. Mountainous terrain or jungles make insurgency easier. There are some economic explanations. People say economic deprivations make it easier for especially young adults to radicalize. There are such economic explanations. There are political explanations. Political discrimination radicalizes people. There are some logistical explanations. If certain state actors sponsor organizations, they have more capacity both to recruit and also to fight. So there are multiple alternative explanations. Maybe next week we will touch upon them. But next week we will also switch the side. From the ethnic group side, we will look at the state side. What does the state do? It's with regard to ethnic groups. And we call them, Şener Aktürk in Koç University calls them ethnicity regimes. Or in one of my articles, I call them ethnic incorporation models. But in a nutshell, there are ethnic policies of the governments, of the states, sometimes favoring certain ethnic groups, and sometimes discriminating against certain ethnic groups. So we will talk about them next week. But for today, I think it was quite a crowded class in terms of the concepts we used. Anything not clear to you guys? It's quite a big vocabulary list. So if you did not get certain parts of this class, okay, I see a comment from Sinan. Sinan, can you say it if your mic is working? Sinan, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Hocam, before the lecture, I read the report that I mentioned in the typing box. They say the same thing about the Syrians. In addition, also they said the Syrian refugees, they cannot call refugees, they call the geçici korunma statüsü altındaki sığınmacılar. And also they said those guys are increasing the rates of the diseases, infections like smallpox, kızamık, whatever. But there's no serious proof on the report. Unfortunately, they are manipulating the public opinion about the Syrians without showing the real proof. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sinan. Yeah, there are such rumors, right? And sometimes they even find some place in reports. Syrians spreading diseases. I don't know, maybe they are, maybe not. I don't know, I didn't see the proof yet. But I hear the argument a lot. Or they are criminal, because of them we see increasing crime rates. Actually, the Ministry of Interior Affairs, they had a report, and they said that such claims were baseless. But still, you will hear about them, and that's normal. This is how social dynamics work. And before we finish, also Furkan mentioned about something. I will get there, and then I will get back to Sinan. So about police shooting of that Syrian kid, a horrible incident. Unfortunately, the police officer said that he didn't do it intentionally, but no matter what, he took the boy's life. So there must be severe punishment for this. We don't have such police shootings incidents. Sometimes it happened. A couple years ago, a Kurdish kid was killed, again with the police gun. The kid was carrying a knife, and he was running away from the police officers. And they shot the kid, he died. These are horrible incidents. I think that was partly because the police did not get right training, or maybe panicked there. I don't want to believe that these people killed them because one was Kurdish, the other one was Syrian. Probably the Syrian kid's identity was even not known to the police officer. The police probably didn't know that was a Syrian. But sometimes when police officers missed running people, they turned out to be suicide bombers. We also had such cases in Turkey. In Beşiktaş, when police did not shoot the potential suspect, that suspect took, I don't know, maybe 10 people's lives in the incident. But again, the solution is not to shoot them from their heart. The police has the authority to use force, but it must be proportionate violence. If a suspect is running away, you need to aim for the legs, let's say. That's legitimate use of force. You have to stop the guy because that guy might be really a suicide bomber. You have to stop the guy. But killing is not the first resort. It must be the last resort. And I think, I want to believe at least, that they were not intentional killings. I think they panicked, or they did not have good training. They couldn't shoot well, target well. But no matter what, if you are taking somebody's life for no reason, there must be severe punishment for that. And finally, we will get back to Sinan. Yes, Sinan.
Thank you, hocam. Last year in Bahçeşehir University, I went one seminar and I had a chit chat with some authorities who works in Turkish Red Crescent, Kızılay. And I asked the claims about the vaccination and the diseases which comes from the Syrians or Syrian kids. And she told me we provide vaccination service and all claims are fake, but also there's another camp and strong opposition about the diseases in Turkey, and they claim that all they comes from the Syrian, but how to say, what should we do? It's yeah, that's all.
Okay, so first of all, the story is not unbelievable because for a while the Turkish border with Syria was very loose, and for a while in 2013, especially and 14, many people passed the border without control. So a spread of some certain diseases at the time is a credible story. I don't know whether it's empirically correct, but it's a believable story. But now, in 2020, Kızılay and the Ministry of Health, they are scanning people, they are providing vaccination, and as of this year, we have no such problem. And that's the official statement. And this story is the right version. Maybe 5 years ago, we had a problem, temporary problem. I can believe that story because it makes sense. But in 2020, now the border is very tight. And all the people inside the country, all the refugees, all the immigrants, they are under record and they are being scanned. So I don't think we have such a problem now. So probably the stories are fake. And with that, I think we can conclude our discussion. Next, we will have our next. Okay, one of you has a loud mic, I believe. So, anyway, we are finishing anyway. So next week we will have our last class, and if you have any final questions, any final comments, not just for next week's topic, but for the entire semester, please make sure that you will ask them next week. So bring them with you. Okay, guys, have a good weekend. See you all.